Every day, over 200,000 vehicles pass by this point on Interstate 95 in Prince William County, Virginia. Immediately to the south is the Quantico Marine Base. The large marine museum is seen towering in the distance. Sprawling over 60,000 acres, it is the major defense activity in Prince William. Immediately adjacent, to the left side of the highway near the museum in this photo, travelers will see a huge forest spanning 15,000 acres. Many could mistake it to be part of Quantico. The forest is peaceful, though, as it belongs to the National Park Service and is today called Prince William Forest Park. But it wasn't always this way. 80 years ago, explosives and gunfire were frequently heard, but this forest was not full of Marines. Instead, it was the highly secretive training ground for the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS. Part of the Army, the OSS was the predecessor to both the Central Intelligence Agency and U.S. Special Operations Command, which uses the OSS spearhead as its own insignia. During the Second World War, the idea for a special operations force with intelligence capabilities originated with the Germans. Created in 1920, the Abwehr was a disguised military intelligence and counterintelligence organization with less than 24 personnel. It was part of the German military, not a separate organization such as the Secret Intelligence Service in Britain or the later CIA in the United States. Rapidly expanded under the National Socialists, the person who would make the Abwehr world famous was Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who led the organization from 1935 to 1944. In October 1939, Canaris created the Brandenburg Division, a special formation of soldiers who engaged in espionage and commando operations. Disguised under the name 800th Special Duties Constructional Training Battalion, the Brandenburgers, as they came to be known, served in every major German offensive. The British took note of these tactics and capabilities, and on July 22, 1940, created the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, to have their own small, language-proficient units operating behind enemy lines. In the United States, one man stands above all others in the creation of the OSS, Major General William J. Donovan, known as Wild Bill. His awards, shown on his portrait, which hangs in the main entrance of the CIA, tell a great deal about the man. The Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, and 3 Purple Hearts. On July 13, 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt sent Donovan to London as his most trusted advisor to see if the United Kingdom had the capabilities to withstand an attack by the Germans. Donovan was briefed on the SOE and returned to the U.S. to recommend that the country create something similar. Thus, on July 11, 1941, Roosevelt appointed Donovan as Coordinator of Information, or COI, a civilian office attached to the White House. On June 13, 1942, with the United States now at war, Roosevelt issued his military order, which established the OSS, now part of the War Department and reporting to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. From 1942 to 1945, the OSS trained at Chopawamsic. Less densely forested then, its woods, fields, and streams served as stand-ins for the countrysides of Germany, China, and Burma. There were other sites as well. Assessments for prospective agents occurred at Station S in nearby Fairfax. Basic training took place at Catoctin Mountain Park in Thurmont, Maryland. Officially Area B, we know it today as Camp David. The Congressional Country Club was Area F, drilling infantry tactics, guerrilla warfare, demolition, parachuting, and hand-to-hand combat. Whitby, Ontario hosted Camp X, operated by the British for their SOE and used by the OSS. The SOE's methods were adapted for U.S. camps at Areas A, B, C, and F. Areas A and C were at Chopawamsic Recreational Demonstration Area, or RDA. Before it was a park, it was the site of the Cabin Branch pyrite mine and poor farming communities. A strike in 1920 for a 50-cent raise ended the mine's operations, seen here in these photos. The New Deal ended the communities for the sake of creating a recreation area. In 1933, Roosevelt launched the Resettlement Administration to remove poor farmers from marginal plots to more fertile locations and acquiring title to the properties through purchase or condemnation. At what would become Chopawamsic, the existing farmland was deemed submarginal and economically bleak. Just south of where Camps 1 and 4 were built, for example, the predominantly black communities of Hickory Ridge and Batestown were eliminated. Locals worked at Quantico or did odd jobs, learning on average in 1933 $536, or the equivalent to about $13,250 in 2025. What roads they had were few and deeply rutted. The people were ultimately forced to leave, some within 2 weeks of notification. The construction of Chopawamsic RDA fell to the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, by over 2,000 CCC enrollees located at 3 camps. Between May 13, 1935 and April 25, 1942, skilled workmen funded by the Works Progress Administration supplemented the CCC. CCC enrollees worked on building roads, grading and clearing brush, and improving drainage for the group camps that would house 100 to 150 people. Each camp included staff quarters, camper and leader cabins, a lodge, a washroom, and latrine. Chopawamsic was one of 2 RDAs in Virginia built with the intent of providing places for low-income inner-city children and families to enjoy the outdoors. In the case of Chopawamsic, the children came from Washington, D.C. Established in 1936, Chopawamsic's camps were divided by race in accordance with NPS Region 1 policies. Camps 1 and 4 were designated for black campers, with Camp 1, known as Camp Lickman, hosting boys from the 12th Street YMCA, the first black YMCA in the U.S. Camps 2, 3, and 5 were designated for white campers. Local practices mandated that the CCC build separate entrances for the black and white camps. These 2 entrances still exist. The one formerly used by the black campers is on the opposite side of the park from the main entrance. The approach of the Second World War ended the CCC recreational projects at Chopawamsic. The War Department received a retroactive use permit on May 16, 1942 for the entire area, and existing camping permits were canceled. Chopawamsic became a heavily guarded and controlled military outpost. Major Albert Jenkins, seen firing the pistol in the left photograph, served as the commanding officer from December 1942 until February 1945. A reserve Marine captain who served in World War I, Jenkins had been recalled to active duty in World War II. Jenkins and staff, as well as logistical support, were based at Camp 1, complete with a dining hall, staff quarters, and other buildings. The camp buildings had been winterized in October 1942 with the addition of glazed window sashes, Celotex-lined wainscoting, heating stoves, and asphalt shingle roofs to allow for year-round training. Camps 1 and 4 became Area C, with Camp 1 focused on espionage, sabotage, small arms use, and tactical exercises, while Camp 4 added communications training for spies and radio operators. Camps 2, 3, and 5 became Area A, dedicated to special operations and operational groups. Agents attended lectures on leadership, tactics, and code work, learning to sabotage bridges and railroads, and went through compass courses and mock reconnaissance missions and mastered the use of pistols, rifles, and grenades. Camp 2, or A2 to the OSS, was a training ground for the operational groups and a basic training area for OSS recruits scheduled for overseas deployment. Within Area A were specialized buildings called mystery houses or the House of Horrors. Here agents were trained to fire instinctively, testing reaction time and decision making. In the summer of 1942, an Army team arrived from Fort Benning, Georgia, led by Lieutenant Colonel Lucius Rucker, to set up training at Camp 3, or A3 to the OSS, for the OSS Parachute School. Agents took off from the airfield at Quantico. Flying over the park, trainees parachuted into the landing zone. Once on the ground, they hiked back to the camp to get a ride back to Quantico and do it again, sometimes 5 times per day. This somewhat impractical training later shut down, and personnel went to the regular airborne school at Fort Benning. Camp A5 hosted the Advanced Special Operations course. Army engineers from nearby Fort Belvoir built a boathouse and dock on the lake. Here, Special Operations personnel practiced waterborne landings and crossings. OSS Maritime Training later moved to Area D near Smiths Point, Maryland, on the Potomac for the new Maritime Unit. On September 22, 1942, General Donovan established the Communications Branch, combining all previous OSS signal facilities and charged with developing a global communications network. Area C was the main communications school for the OSS, training over 1,500 personnel in shortwave radio, codes and ciphers, equipment operation, and maintenance. Counting cadre and trainees, Area C's total capacity was 357. At Area C, the OSS altered many of the NPS summer camp buildings and installed a swimming pool for waterborne instruction. At Camp 1, trainees scheduled for overseas deployment had to take basic training. Camp 1 also served as a holding area for men awaiting further assignment overseas or veterans returning from abroad. Incredibly, in 1945, Camp 1 served as an area for training Koreans and other Asians for OSS operations in the final offenses planned for 1946 against the Japanese Army in China, Korea, and Japan itself. Camp 4 contained the main communications school, its large building 78 becoming the SS Code Room. These buildings still stand. The OSS built target ranges about 200 yards east of Area 4, a pistol range with 6 silhouette stationary targets and a rifle range with 8 targets. A utility range was over a ridge and in a valley formed by the Quantico Creek, about another 200 yards southeast of the rifle range, and served as the site of the grenade and demolitions range. No deserted houses or structures were deliberately demolished in Area C. One cabin was destroyed by fire, and part of a building used for the motor pool burned down. In both cases, the OSS rebuilt the structures. These were the only buildings destroyed by the OSS during the war. By September 1944, the OSS began to shift training to the West Coast Training Center as victory in the European theater drew near. The NPS, OSS, and Marines at Quantico began to plan for the transfer of land in the post-war years. By 1946, the OSS was disbanded, and by 1948 the area received its current name. The final settlement for control of the southern area of the park wasn't resolved until 2003. The National Park Service preserves the OSS artifacts from the park. The collection of CCC buildings, as modified by the OSS, is the largest in the country. Many of the records and artifacts of the OSS are held by the CIA Museum in Langley, a facility unavailable to the public. Over 300 people buried in the park are cataloged and cared for by Historic Prince William, a private group, and the Prince William County Office of Historic Preservation maintains the records of the communities that once dotted the landscape. While most NPS visitors to Prince William County come to see the Manassas battlefield, it is important to acknowledge the efforts of these groups and to keep this local history alive, even if most motorists just drive by.